Hi, I'm Bob Butler from KCBS Radio. Welcome to a forum where we'll be discussing Measure H, a ballot initiative that voters in El Cerrito will consider during a special election this November. Measure H requires a 2/3 majority vote. It continues a parcel tax that was approved by voters in 2000. The existing tax expires June 30th, 2020. Now, H asks El Cerrito property owners if they're willing to continue to pay $58.46 for each single-family home and $45 for each apartment unit. Measure H is estimated to produce $650,000 a year. It does not have an end date and will continue until repealed or amended by the voters. Now, these services include local control of recreation services, maintaining and improving swim center pools, walking paths, open space, and play fields. Today's forum is sponsored by the Contra Costa Clerk Recorder's Office, Registrar of Voters, and the League of Women Voters of Diablo Valley, and the League of Women Voters of West Contra Costa. We're recording the roundtables here in the studios of Contra Costa Television. Today's speakers are Councilman Paul Fedeli from El Cerrito, who is speaking in favor of H, and Susan Prico of the Contra Costa Taxpayers Association, who is opposed. We drew lots before we started to determine who will speak first, and Mr. Fedeli, you have the floor. Why do you think this is a good idea?
Well, first, I want to thank Contra Costa Television and the League of Women Voters for this opportunity. And I want to say right away that this Measure H, will not raise taxes. As Bob mentioned, it continues the same parcel tax that El Cerritans have voted for and paid for the last 20 years to support our quality of life in El Cerrito, our parks, our pools, our nature areas, and our facilities where programs for kids are dealt with. I was raised in El Cerrito, hung out at the pools and the parks. I swam competitively at the pool. I hung out at Poinsett Park. So it's important to me. But more important, it's more important for the new residents coming into El Cerrito as we continue to grow. El Cerrito is going through a great period of growth with new development on San Pablo Avenue and the BART areas. And we need to make sure moving forward that we commit to these people and to the El Cerritans now that we continue our quality of life. And that means continuing Measure H. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Fedeli. Susan Prico from the Taxpayers Association, I suspect you have a different view of this.
I do too, but it's not that I don't like parks, I do. I love the open spaces. I love having recreational activities for seniors and children. Everybody does. But this is about accountability. One thing that's missing, and the most important thing that's missing about Measure H, is a sunset clause. This means that the voters have the right to say yes or no if they believe that that their tax dollars are being spent appropriately or not. That's kind of the way things go in Prop 13. That was the idea behind the tax revolt. The voters had lost their voice. By not having a sunset clause, even 20 years later, the voters are giving up their right to speak and say no if they think things are going bad. The language in there does not help anything, and this is not a new tax, but it's just one of the 27 existing taxes that will continue.
Now, Mr. Fedeli, how many parks, how many pools are we talking about in El Cerrito?
We have 2 pools and a play area for children. And 16 parks, including a new Centennial Park, which celebrated our 100th anniversary. We have hillside natural areas. We have the Ohlone Greenway. We've got a lot of facilities where children's programs are conducted. And this will really help us to maintain that. We're down our recent plan that we had, our major parks and recreational management plan said that we're out $38 million that we need to keep up our parks and our facilities. And we need an annual total of about $250,000 for our facilities, $550,000 annually for our landscaping of our parks. This measure, as you mentioned, will bring in $650,000 a year, continuing with no increase in taxes at all to continue the quality of life.
The $38 million deficit, I don't understand that.
There was a major master plan over the last 2 years that our city undertook to look into the various needs, desires, and what maintenance do we need to have. Looking over the next 20 years, they totaled up the cost that it would take to maintain because of deferred maintenance, how much it would cost. And so it's a $38 million shortfall that we'll have to make up. If we don't get Measure H, we'll have to go to our general fund money, which we're barely balanced now as a city with a lot of fire needs, a lot of infrastructure needs. And so this is important to continue something without raising taxes.
Yeah, Sue, you mentioned that it's another one of 27 taxes. I mean, so you do the calculations, $58 a year, that's about $1.25 a month that taxpayers are paying now. What's wrong with them continuing to pay that to pay for the parks?
Nothing. Normally, we'd say this would just be something that the community could decide. But because there's no sunset clause, the voters will never be able to speak on it again. Maybe 5 years down the road, 10, 20, 30, 50 years, there may be a city council in place that is spending wildly, and the voters will lose the opportunity to say, let's stop this. And that's the problem with not having a sunset clause. The language in the ballot measure says, until voters decide otherwise. This means that a group would have to form and go through a lengthy, expensive, and very uncomfortable process petitioning to get something on the ballot. It's not as easy as going to the city council and saying, wait a minute, you're not spending this right. No, it would have to be a voter referendum. And that's really too much for the voters to ask. Right now, the voters have the authority, the responsibility, and the voice to say in the future, maybe this isn't going right, and we're not sure if our $58 or $45 per apartment unit is being spent properly, and they can put on the brakes. But with Measure H, they can't. They're going to be paying for it in perpetuity.
If voters came to the council meeting and said, listen, we want to vote on this, can't the council put something on the ballot?
Exactly, and I just want to say, I want to address this because just in the last 6 months, we had a referendum on tenant protections in El Cerrito. It happened very quickly. Petitions got out there, it got on the ballot, and we had to restrict that, pull that back. It happened. And I just want to say that the city, in preparing for this, the city polled our citizens about what they would like, whether they wanted this to last for 20 years, 30 years, or the wording that we now have on the ballot. They preferred 70% the words on the ballot now. 30%, 30 years was second, 20 having a sooner vote on this was the least popular vote. So this can happen. Any new city council member can come and organize and have this presented to them and pull this back. They can change the rates, they can lower the rates. Of $5 a month is nothing that we're talking about to support our parks and our pools. So it can happen. It just happened in El Cerrito in the last few months, and our citizens support this going forward. And why spend another election in 20 years, the costly cost of another election? Let's leave this on until the citizens or city council decide to retract this.
Why isn't this money in the general fund to take care of the parks?
Well, because the general fund is very tight right now, and the people decided 20 years ago specifically that the parks and pools were important enough to have a special tax on them, a special parcel tax, a very moderate parcel tax. So it exists. I wasn't there when this happened, but the citizens decided. The quality of life in El Cerrito is very important, and this was a measure to say we care enough about this and our real estate values to keep them high that we want this quality of life.
You know, I'm thinking back to, that would have been 1999. That was a time, I think that was the dot-com boom. You think maybe voters said, listen, we're making plenty of money, let's go ahead and put the tax on let's tax ourselves to pay for this?
Mm-hmm. Funny you should mention 1999. 1999-2000 was when CalPERS changed their structure to give more benefits to pensioners. Most notably, public safety went what we commonly refer to as 3% at 55. 3% at 50. It's 2% at 55 for miscellaneous employees. And that started a trend which created a pension debt across the state for anybody in CalPERS. El Cerrito has over $60 million in debt for the pension fund, and it's continuing to grow. And it will continue to grow. We've projected a huge growth. It's over on our website at cocotax.org, and it shows what we can expect over the next 5 years for all the cities and their pension. a lot of Measure H is, okay, let's put some money over here to keep all that stuff, but we're not going to tell you we also have that $60 million debt. That's not part of the ballot measure. You don't see that. And that is something that they have to address. It's not easy. And I don't know about you, but I've never seen a city ever take up a proposition where they will reduce a tax. And it's a great idea, have people come in and say, come on, city, why don't you start this measure and stop it because we don't like the way you're spending money. I just don't see that happening. Not now, not ever. And if you think it will, it's cute, but it's naive. And the cost of another election, as you mentioned, how much is this one costing? There's only 2 ballot measures on the county ballots this time, gearing up before all of them come in that menu of propositions we're expecting in March and November of 2020. It's going to look like a McDonald's menu without a Happy Meal on it.
The final vote is now for whether, and the wording is on the measure. We don't hide anything. We talk in our material about how much it will cost for apartments and homes and how long it will be. It polled very well. The people now will vote on whether they want to extend that without coming back for another election. Let them vote.
How much is this election costing?
That's a city, or the county has that information. I'm not sure about that exact.
It's going to be between 60 and 100,000, I would expect. I haven't checked the current amounts, but every special election, they have to bear their own costs. And, this could have actually waited until March when there is the primary election of 2020. I know that's cutting it a little short.
It's cutting it short with 2/3.
Yeah, but it would have saved
2/3 people, and we want a second chance if in fact it doesn't pass now. So that allows us that.
Okay, so if people say, wait a minute, you are robbing me of my right to say no at some point in the future, then you'll go back in March and put it on with a sunset clause?
I didn't say that.
Oh, okay. Well, there's a
sounds like a
suggestion. Yeah, there's a suggestion.
People have the right now to vote.
That's right.
And it's
you
all
want to take
on
it
the
away.
ballot, and what we're talking about is no tax increase, continuing what we've done. There's nothing.
Excuse me, but the right to vote is not something that should be given away lightly. The right to speak on whether or not your tax dollars are being spent properly
And we
cannot
outline
be
that
taken away.
completely on the
No,
ballot?
you don't. You take it away in perpetuity. You just say, we're going to charge you $58.46 per unit until
Well,
the
And
day
people
you
can
die.
vote no on that.
yeah, and to
They
be
can
fair,
vote
it
And
does,
I hope they will.
it does say until repealed or amended by the
repealed.
voters.
Exactly,
Okay.
which is just what I was saying. That is not as easy as it sounds. It makes it sound quite easy. Okay, the voters will say no. They're not going to have a routine opportunity. They're going to have a big citizens action committee that's going to
Like
form.
what just happened in El Cerrito 2 months ago.
On the rent
It
control,
happened,
yes.
It can't, yes, it could happen again. If the people don't want our parks and our pools and our nature areas maintained, they can start an
Yeah, didn't I hear you at the city council meeting criticize that petition process? The city council was going to go right ahead with all those rent control, or I believe they're calling it tenant protection rights. The city council was going to go straight ahead if there had not been a group that got the petition that said, wait a minute, you can't do this without a proper vote. And you would have gone ahead with it. You would have passed.
That's the
you would have put it.
process. You're just saying that process doesn't exist. It did exist.
And
People
it
happened.
was
got it.
difficult. They had to collect signatures. They have to go around. It's
did it.
expensive and in a very short amount of time.
Well,
and
you're
good for
saying
them.
it didn't exist. It does exist. It can happen. It's on the ballot
But
for
you
people
were-
to know that goes on. It polled well. We could have put 30 years. We could have put 20 years on. But
Yeah,
what
you
polled
could.
more was keeping it
Okay.
perpetuity.
You said it polled well, 70% of the voters you talked to. How many voters did you guys talk to?
That was a polling contractor that did that, and it was like 77% said they supported it on perpetuity, and then it was less than 70% for 20 and 30 years.
Because you need 67% for this to
Exactly.
pass.
Exactly.
Are you optimistic?
It polls wonderful. I mean, it's tough to
Well, a
hate
lot of things
parks.
poll wonderful. I mean,
Well,
the last
you know,
2016 polled wonderful too.
Parks and pools and nature areas are like apple pie and motherhood, and we're not raising taxes. So that's what's out there. That's what's before the voters, and they can either vote against this or not.
Why is it that when you have taxes or issues like this, the only people that have to pay are the property owners? The people that rent and use the parks, they don't have to pay. Well, why not?
That's the statute, state statute. Property owners, that is what a parcel tax is someone that owns
Is
property.
there any other way you can
And
do
our
this?
real estate people are supporting this. The separate committee are talking about the values of El Cerrito property because of our natural areas and our great quality of life keeps the values of property high in El Cerrito. It's a great place to move, it's a great place to live, and people are willing to pay the same small amount, less than $5 a month, for the great opportunities in El Cerrito.
Is there another way this can be done where everybody, all the residents pay, the homeowners, the renters?
Well, the renters are going to be paying it in their rent.
Right.
I mean, the landlords are going to have to pass it on. And I mean, those were
We don't
issues
have to
that.
pass it on.
But it's a business matter, and most people don't rent a place to lose money. They at least have to have enough to pay their taxes, to maintain it in working order, give them a nice place to live. And there's also the free market. There's competition. With more competition in the free market, I would believe that rents will come down. The more controls that are put on landlord, rents will keep going up because the landlords have to protect themselves. If we want more housing, we have to do it there. And yeah, El Cerrito's a lovely place to live. I've loved El Cerrito since I was a little girl. But this isn't about the pretty parks. This is not about that. It's about the voters' right to put on the brakes in the future. Can you guarantee me that in 20 years, 30 years, the city council that's going to sit there is not going to take this and use it to backfill something of their own political preferences?
Can you guarantee anything?
No,
No.
that's why there's a
And there
sunset
could be a
clause that should be there.
The new city council can come in. You can support a candidate that will want to make that motion and move in that direction. I don't think people want to take away their parks. This is something that's popular. My view is it's going to stay, and it's a value that El Cerritans want. I think you've
it's not
mentioned
about
three
the-
other issues tonight. You're against taxes in every arena, so this is just one more arena that you're thematically opposing. This is specific to parks and El Cerritans' value of life and the quality of life in our town. And it's not raising taxes 1 cent.
I'm curious about something you said. You said there's a scenario where you could lower rents. I want to hear more about that. 'Cause I
The
think
free market.
The free
That's
market?
competition. You know, we're in an area where we hear a lot about a housing crisis and a shortage of affordable housing. But what we hear about being built are things that are really going to be quite expensive. You start putting in more controls, well, the landlords are going to have to say, wait a minute, especially those that don't own a lot of commercial property, those that just own a few parcels of land. And they're saying, well, I'm only allowed to increase the rent 5%, but my tax bill's going way up. So how am I going to make ends meet? If you don't have those controls, you let the free market decide. You put in the competition. That will bring down the rents. It will maintain the quality because if you have two pieces of property, one is well maintained at a reasonable price, the other one is not well maintained and overpriced, which one are you going to pick? They could be next door to each other. The free market is what is going to help keep the rents low. And El Cerrito is almost built out.
that's my question. If you want more competition, but where are you going to build the homes that are going to
We're
compete?
building along San Pablo Avenue. We have plans for 2,500 new units coming in, including the Mayfair lot next to BART, starting next week. Incredible growth along El Cerrito and around our BART station. So the growth is happening. And the state has just moved on a tenant protection bill and anti-gouging bill. So the city didn't have to do that. The state will now have to comply with that statewide. But El Cerritans have been very good about paying for what they want and willing to say, I'm willing to pay for the accoutrements that make my city better, whether it's lighting, paving, parks. This is one that continues. It's up for renewal after 20 years. No one has complained about it. We have had concerns about not responding to the elderly who might want a pickleball court, or the youngsters who may want a hill bicycle area in our area. We can't meet this without continuing at the same rate the parcel tax that's before us.
Does the 650, does that actually cover the cost for maintaining all the parks?
No, I mean, it's ongoing. There's a plan that our master plan has where we will address those immediate concerns that can be fixed. Fix it first, whether it's the activity, housing units at our parks, our clubhouses, the facilities. There are things that can be fixed immediately. There are some plans for landscaping that needs to happen continuous. There's a possibility of turf for our big Cerrito Vista Park. There's also some new plans for soccer fields and fixing the community place where kids have programs. But then there's new parks that people may want, and that has to be in the planning if we are going to grow, because we are growing along San Pablo and around our BART stations. There's new people coming in, and the usage will take investment, and we can't defer the maintenance anymore.
Well, you said it yourself. El Cerritans are willing to pay for their quality of life. And that's why all of your ballot measures start out, to retain the quality of life, to maintain the parks and the playgrounds and all that. And you said, here it was, 20 years, you've never had a problem. Great. But you want to take that option away from them. You said 20-year sunset of the original measure, I believe it was Measure A, was the first one for 2000. And in 20 years, you haven't had a problem. It's gone well. Terrific. But you're taking away that opportunity for your voters in the future under Measure H. They should be able to say in another 20 years, yeah, this is going well, and we want to keep doing it, and we want to keep supporting it.
The system just worked in El Cerrito, as we said. It just worked. Issues that the city council moved on were repealed because the citizens went out with a measure and responded. Citizens can do that. City council can do that. I'm looking at the charts here about support for until repeal by voters. It was 77.5%. The 30-year was 71%. The 20-year sunset was 70%. There's great support for all these, but the greatest support, almost 80%, was for until repeal by voters. So we're not going against what our El Cerritans want. We're putting on the ballot what it says. Voters can look at this. If they don't like it and they want a sunset, they can vote against this. We need 2/3. That's a tough hill to climb.
As well it should be.
So let's see what the voters say in El Cerrito about this. We're putting the price on there. We're saying what the money will do as far as pools, our programs for children, our swimming pool and locker rooms and restrooms. We want to fix our city, keep it up for the growth we're having. People can vote against it if the sunset is the big issue to them.
If the people vote against it, what do they do to maintain the parks?
It's not that they don't have the money. There's still general fund money.
We have no general fund money. We're maybe balanced by $2,000 from last year. That's a balance. We don't have enough money coming in.
I wouldn't worry about it because we'll have another opportunity in March to vote again. Because, as he said, if it fails, they'll just put another one on with a sunset clause. But to answer your question, where would the money come from? El Cerrito gets about 22 cents on the dollar out of the 1% countywide property tax. It's quite a bit for a small city. And they have income coming in. And they own property where they have income that comes in. So there's money there. I'm not saying it would be easy to find the money for the landscaping and all this, and they'd have to take a look at it. But how many people understand what until repealed by the voters or until the voters say otherwise?
Because it says it, until repealed by voters.
Yeah, but what does that mean? That doesn't tell them that they will have to go pound the pavement and get signatures and go through a process and the filing.
You'll tell them.
Yeah, I'm not going to be here 50 years from now.
Let me ask you this. Yeah, so let's say this Measure H fails, and the council comes back, or they come back and put another measure on the ballot in March that says for another 20 years we're going to do this. Would you support that?
I'd consider it.
With a sunset, would you support it?
With a sunset,
so a tax?
I would look at this very differently.
So it's all about the sunset. You support the taxes that exist now.
It's about accountability. It's about the sunset, about the right of the people to speak.
Because 1 year from now, with this language, your organization could come back and ask that we repeal or we lower the taxes for our parks and our pools. You could do that now. That's up to the voters to say they don't want that. Okay, that can happen, but you're willing to go to our general fund that's barely balanced to help support the high quality of life in our city, our pools which need maintenance. You want to tap into our general fund even more closely than it is
If it means giving
now.
up the voters' right to speak, yes. Nothing is more important.
They're speaking by this vote. They can
They haven't
vote for
voted
this.
yet.
Well, of course, but they will.
And they will,
In
you know,
November.
and we'll see.
2 months away, they're
But
gonna
most
vote.
people don't understand what that language, I've taken those surveys, I've heard the way they're slanted. They have all the information. Well, if we told you this, what would you say? If we told you that, what they say? And you tell them, okay, well, until the voters say no,
And they
doesn't
have a
that sound
right to
good?
say no.
But that doesn't tell the voters what it takes to do that.
So you're assuming they don't have knowledge of our system.
Well, I'm telling you that a lot of people have told me, especially after Measure V, that was just a year ago, where you raised money. Some of it was the same language: walking paths, play fields, open space, that kind of stuff. That was part of what Measure V was for. And people are telling me they didn't really know what that meant. I've been hearing this all year. Well, does that mean how much am I going to have to pay if I sell my house? Oh my God. I wasn't planning on that.
Well, you guys oppose every tax measure. So,
Not true.
Well,
Absolutely
tell us one
untrue.
that you support. Give us some
Right now-
indication now of something you support.
There was the measure on the marijuana tax in the last election, the county, and there was an East County measure that we supported for, and I've forgotten at the moment. There was one in Lafayette, Orinda, in
What
the
year was
schools for the,
that?
Okay.
last year.
I'm still stuck on the fact that you answer those phone calls from survey people.
You've done them too.
No. When I hear them, I don't answer the phone. Look, I want to thank our panelists for answering. These are very important questions. We had a pretty lively conversation here, but each speaker will now have 1 minute to make a closing statement. And because we started with Mr. Fideli, Sue, go ahead.
Okay.
I should say Ms. Preco, go ahead, because I shouldn't be calling him Mr. and you.
You're welcome to
call
call.
me Paul.
Okay.
Yeah, that'll work. Okay. Anyway, I want to thank the League of Women Voters, Contra Costa TV, and you, Bob, for sponsoring this and putting this on. Yeah, I like parks. I like open spaces. I love the amenities that are in El Cerrito. But I also more love the right to vote. And I don't think people take the time and effort in our busy world to really research what their vote means and how important it is. It should not be given up for anything. And Measure H wants you to give up your vote in the future to say yes or no to this measure. Yes, it's a smaller one as compared to many others, but it is important. Every parcel tax should have a sunset clause, meaning the people retain their right to be heard without going through a large and expensive and onerous process. It's difficult. You shouldn't have to fight your own city council. So we're asking you to please read your ballots carefully and vote no on Measure H.
Thanks a lot, Ms. Preco. Mr. Paul Fideli.
Thank you very much. Thank you again. This was lively. It's all taxes. Talking about taxes is always lively. But I'm puzzled how anyone could oppose at no additional cost supporting our parks and pools in El Cerrito. Our citizens in El Cerrito love the parks and pools. They just want them to be maintained, and they want them to continue when we're going through a growth surge here. It's an investment in our community that needs to continue, and there's fire prevention. There's a lot of other things that we need to think about as a committee and a city that's growing to move on. So interestingly, we're talking about a vote on the status quo to keep the future of El Cerrito in good shape and the good quality of life we have. So I hope you'll join the Sierra Club, Nancy Skinner, Buffy Wicks, the entire city council, all of our past mayors in supporting this measure that will prevent us from going into our general fund and continue with no increase in taxes to support our parks and pools. Thank you very much.
Thank you. That concludes our forum for Measure H, a ballot initiative El Cerrito voters will consider in the special election November 5th. Now, once again, I want to thank our speakers, Mr. Paul Fedeli, City Council member for El Cerrito, and Susan Preco from the Contra Costa Taxpayers Association. For more information on the measure, visit the website votersedge.org. To view this broadcast online, go to www.cocovote.us. The Elections Office would also like to remind voters to go online to check to make sure that you are registered and consider if they would like to switch to receiving their ballots by mail. I'm Bob Butler from KCBS Radio. Thank you for watching, and don't forget to vote November 5th.